so excited to be here at the expo. It's such a great opportunity, whether you're new to the gluten-free diet or you've been gluten-free for many years, to try new products and try new things and meet new people that represent these companies. So it's just going to be a really fun day. So thank you for coming to this first session. I'm going to talk about setting up a gluten-free pantry. So this is especially important if you're new to the diet and you're trying to figure out how to make this sort of a natural part of your home and your kitchen. So I hope today to give you some good tips and some really good products to keep your kitchen stocked with that will help you kind of keep going with your diet or transition into your diet in a really easy and successful way. We're going to start with prepping your pantry. I'm not sure how many people are new to the diet or how many have already been gluten-free for just a bit, but of course we have to avoid wheat, barley, and rye. That's the premise of the gluten-free diet. So when you're starting to think about your kitchen and transitioning the foods that you have in your home, the first thing that you're going to want to do is throw out or relocate or give away any foods that contain gluten. So you're going to have to spend some time kind of going through all the products that you're used to eating all the time and really reading the labels and seeing what's safe for you and what's not. So especially if you are sharing your home with other people that are still eating gluten, that's a really important time to take a minute to set up your kitchen in a way that'll keep you both healthy and happy. So what I like to really do first is designate a space in my kitchen for gluten-free items only. So whether that be a cabinet or some drawers or one side of the fridge or whatever you want to do, I think it's really important to know that that's where your gluten-free items live, so that that's a safe space for you. And what you're really going to want to do is clean all your shelves really well, clean your utensils. If you're using cutting boards, try to stick with plastic, because if you're using a wood cutting board, grains of bread, little crumbs of bread can get stuck in the grains of the wood. So it's always good to have plastic cutting boards. Sometimes people like to label, their cutting boards if they're going to be using them for bread or just for gluten-free items only. Another thing to really pay attention to is the toaster. Crumbs tend to kind of collect in the bottom of your toaster and they'll live there forever. So you might want to really thoroughly clean out your toaster, or maybe even get a new toaster that's just for gluten-free bread. So those kinds of things, you're just going to want to really set up a space and a place in your kitchen that's just for you. And the other important thing is, if you do have a kitchen that you're sharing with someone that is eating gluten, you're going to want to put your gluten-containing items below your gluten-free items. Like if you think of your baking shelf, there's always kind of flour everywhere, and that flour can kind of trickle down onto gluten-free flour. So you always put those things up higher so that that's not a problem. So those are some tips about setting up your actual kitchen. And now we'll get into the fun part of stocking your gluten-free pantry, which today is so much fun because, as you can see by our haul of amazing vendors out there, there are so many delicious products to try. Not like many years ago when you really had to search around and we were wanting for many things. So I'm going to start with grain-based products. So when you think about giving up wheat, the first thing that you think about is grains and what other grains can I eat. Brown rice and wild rice, all rice is naturally gluten-free. I like to stick with brown and wild rice because they're really healthy with the whole grain. Anything that has a whole grain to it is going to give you more protein and fiber. So I like to stick with a brown or wild variety. Quinoa, which I actually have here. Has anyone not tried quinoa before? Yeah, quinoa is amazing. So you can really use it in so many dishes. It almost can be used like a rice. It's packed with protein, so it's a really awesome thing to have in your pantry. Sometimes I'll use it in stir fries as a base. I'll eat it as just a side dish. But if you have not tried quinoa, definitely try it. You cook it just like rice pretty much. It will keep for several days in the fridge. So I always have a batch of quinoa going just as like a nice side. So this is a really, really good protein-packed thing to have in your pantry. I always like to keep lentils for soups and stews. Lentils are also really rich in protein, so that's another really good addition to your diet. Buckwheat, despite the name, is actually 100% gluten-free. It's just kind of a tricky name, unfortunately. But I love these buckwheat soba noodles. They're from Eden Foods, and make sure to get 100% whole buckwheat because sometimes they're mixed with other grains. but 100% buckwheat. I buy these in Whole Foods or like Yes Market, any kind of Whole Foods type store will have something like this. So these are great in Asian dishes. If you're going to make a stir fry or something like that, these are really, really also packed with protein and really good for you. So buckwheat is another grain that you should keep on your list. And then of course, gluten-free pasta. There are so many brands of gluten-free pasta now, which is amazing. I love Jovial pasta. It comes in all kinds of different shapes, and you can find lasagna noodles. I actually saw at Whole Foods the other day a traditional egg noodle that was gluten-free, which I haven't seen before. So that's really exciting. So whatever you're looking for, even if you're looking for like an orzo, there's corn-based orzo now. The options are really limitless now with what types of pasta you can make. So you can really just do all your favorite dishes just gluten-free. So that's great. I also really like to keep breadcrumbs on hand, gluten-free breadcrumbs. These are just made from brown rice, really, and you can kind of flavor them yourself with some garlic or oregano or whatever you like. But these are great to keep on hand for like baked chicken or coating fish, or if you are making meatballs and you need some breadcrumbs quickly. So I always like to have those on hand. So that's kind of my go-to list of grain-based products. I always like to keep them stocked in my pantry because these are the things that I use most often for weeknight dinners. I like to not have to run out to the store a lot. So I'll always have a couple boxes of pasta and several bags of quinoa. So breakfast foods, I think, are something that has really kind of gotten a makeover in the past few years in the gluten-free community because there are so many big brands now like Cheerios, which are turning their cereals gluten-free, which is awesome. If you're extremely sensitive, then be careful of Cheerios. There are so many other gluten-free cereals out there now. Chex has a whole line of gluten-free cereals other than the wheat that are awesome. And like you also mentioned, if you walk down the cereal aisle, there are so many options now. So you can kind of pick your favorites and try new things and hopefully find one that works for you. To the point about gluten-free oatmeal, oats are actually, they do not contain gluten naturally, but because of processing, they're often contaminated. So if you are going to buy oats, do choose something like a Bob's Red Mill gluten-free that's clearly has a dedicated facility. So I really like the quick cooking oats. You can make them in about 3 minutes in the morning. You can also do like overnight oats and put them in the fridge before you go to bed, and then you have oats when you wake up in the morning, which is really easy breakfast. So I eat these probably 3 times a week. So this is and they also have a gluten-free steel cut oatmeal, which is really great as well. The other thing, and I saw that pop up a little bit earlier on our interactive panel over there, that like bagels and bread, that tends to be the thing that people are most weary of replacing, just because gluten-free bread, if you're new to the diet, it does have a different texture and a little bit of a different taste. So you do kind of have to experiment to try your favorites. Often, I put a little note up here that often gluten-free bread may be in the freezer section. It doesn't quite have the shelf life that wheat bread has, so you might check there. But there are so many brands like Udi's and Rudi's. There's lots of multigrain, there's cinnamon raisin. So there's definitely a wide variety. You can kind of try them out and see what works for you. I always recommend toasting them first. They generally taste a little better if they're toasted, even in sandwiches and things like that. But there are brands like Char's here today, and they have a gluten-free bread that's vacuum sealed that they say has a 6-month shelf life if it's not open. So there are certain breads that you'll see out on the shelves in the bread aisle as well. So that takes a little bit of an experimentation process to find your favorite, but don't give up because there are really good ones out there. I also like some mornings, if I'm kind of in a rush, I'll go for like a gluten-free breakfast bar. So Glutino has a really good one. Kind bars are really great if you want like something that's nut-based and healthy. So those are good to kind of keep in your purse for moments when you get really hungry in the morning. I also love doing like a granola and yogurt also. So I always have, Kind has a gluten-free granola. There are several varieties of gluten-free granola out there. But this I like to just put over yogurt, or you can just eat it with milk or dry or whatever, but that's a really good, full of fiber and protein kind of thing that I like to keep on hand as well. So breakfast foods overall, I mean, if you walk down the breakfast aisle section, there are new products popping up all the time. So breakfast has definitely gotten a lot easier. And then canned goods, these are not something that necessarily you wouldn't have in your house already. But I always like to think ahead, and I always have lots of canned beans or chickpeas, canned veggies, tomato sauce, things like that make the weeknights a little bit easier. Sometimes when you're on a specific diet and you have to think ahead a lot more, it always helps to have these things on hand so that you're not constantly running to the store or like thinking, what am I going to eat tonight? So sometimes I'll just do like rice and beans or something, but I always have these on hand for salads and chilies and everything. So you probably have your own kind of set of, goods that you like to keep in the house, but that's always nice to be able to mix and match meals quickly. So that's just a little tip on stocking up. And then snacks, that's another whole category of foods that has become more and more amazing over the years. Specifically, we have gluten-free pretzels now in so many different flavors, which I was so excited when these came out. So Snyder's has a really good one. I also was in the store yesterday and saw giant gluten-free pretzels. So they're like the big ones now, which I think was also Snyder's. So that's really cool, lots of good snacks. Chips are generally, if you're going for like a basic potato chip, there's so many brands that are gluten-free. You just want to double check the ingredients. I like to go for brands like this where they have a very short ingredients list. And generally, my kind of rule of thumb is the more flavored a chip gets, the more careful you have to be. So I like to just stick with kind of more basic flavors. That tends to be a safer bet. And corn chips, of course, there are tons of brands of corn chips that are gluten-free for, dipping in salsa, making nachos, all that kind of fun stuff. So that's good. And even when you are at Mexican restaurants, I always get excited because I can, eat all the chips. And then crackers, there are so many brands of crackers. I know we have a lot of vendors out there today that are serving up different varieties of crackers. I love Nut Thins. They come in a variety of flavors. I almost always have them, and when I put them out, people don't even know they're gluten-free. They are immediately gone. So I like to also choose products that I think that my guests will enjoy as well, even if they're not gluten-free. So that line is particularly good. There are a lot more out there, as I mentioned, so give those a try as well. I did see earlier cookies popping up as something that is a little more difficult to replace. But these kinds of cookies, I love these little bunny cookies from Annie's. These are gluten-free. They have a few different flavors. These are really good for kids too, like little kind of graham cracker type snacks. Especially if you go to like a Whole Foods, there is like a whole aisle of gluten-free cookies. Some are of course better than others, but again, that's a fun thing to experiment with. Nobody minds trying lots of different kinds of cookies. But there are so many, and also there's a lot of baking mixes. If you're a baker and you'd prefer to make your own cookies, Betty Crocker has baking mixes now. So many companies like Bob's and Pamela's have, chocolate chip cookie, sugar cookie. So really, again, it just is a little bit of experimentation and exploration, but you can definitely find cookies, so don't worry about that. And popcorn. Corn is naturally gluten-free, so I'm always snacking on air pop popcorn, which is actually a pretty healthy snack. You can flavor it yourself with, butter, salt, olive oil, whatever you wish. And I sometimes take that to work with me as like a little midday snack, so I always have popcorn. Condiments. This is probably something when I first came to the gluten-free diet that I was searching for the most, especially to kind of flavor foods. And I love sushi and Asian food, so I was especially looking for kind of stir-fry sauces and soy sauce and things like that. Sanjay is probably one of my favorite companies for this sort of thing. The reason that Asian cuisine is kind of difficult is because there's a lot of soy sauce, which has wheat in it. This is a tamari sauce, which is a wheat-free soy sauce. You will not taste the difference at all. This tastes exactly like soy sauce. So I always have this on hand for cooking. I have been known to pull this out of my purse at restaurants, which is always fun. They actually have little to-go packets of soy sauce, which I found after I got a weird look for pulling this out of my purse at a restaurant. So yeah, check those out. Mm-hmm.
Where can you get that brand?
This is Whole Foods. You can order it online. This is actually really widely available. So any kind of natural food store, Yes Market, those types of stores. Sanjay, yep. Mm-hmm.
A little pack, the low salt one.
This is the low salt one. Yes, I prefer that one. That's a good point. There's a lot of sodium in just like 1 tablespoon, so I always go for the low sodium. It still is salty enough to get you the flavor that you want without, having you not be able to get your rings off the next day. So, which is a big problem for me.
The only place I found the little packets though were at Wegmans.
At Wegmans?
I haven't found the little packets.
Yeah.
Anywhere else.
I've seen them at Whole Foods, but it's kind of hit or miss. So those, if you are someone that likes to eat out a lot, Asian cuisine, I would recommend ordering them on Amazon. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they're not low salt.
They're not low salt. Yeah, that's unfortunate. The question is about sushi rice having gluten. It is hit or miss. I would fully recommend calling the restaurant ahead of time. In my personal experience, if you go to like a little bit of a higher end restaurant, that won't be the case. Whereas if you're buying kind of pre-made sushi from like a grocery store or kind of like really quick to go type place. Now that's not to say that they're all like that, so I would recommend checking. But that is something that I've kind of noticed. So if you're going to a nice restaurant, I would just ask ahead of time and just make sure. But really it is kind of place to place. It just depends on how they make their rice. But you can always do like a sashimi and get the fish on the side and ask for like a dish of brown rice or something and kind of put it together yourself. Sashimi, which is just like the fish itself outside of the roll. So that's an idea if you still want to eat out and are kind of worried about the mix. Tofu is gluten-free. Yep. Naturally gluten-free. So as long as you're getting something that's not mixed with spices or mixed with something else, if you're just buying pure tofu, you should be fine. But most of the companies now will label their packets gluten-free. So you just look for that label, but you should be fine with tofu. From the same company, actually, the other thing that I was really missing was like a teriyaki sauce or flavored sauces that I didn't have to make myself. So this company has a whole line of gluten-free marinades as well. So this is awesome for like marinating steak or chicken or fish or whatever, or just putting over a stir-fry kind of dish that you make yourself. So I love these sauces. I always have some of them in my fridge just to kind of pep up my dinners a little bit. And then the other thing that can be a challenge is barbecue sauce. Some barbecue sauce will have gluten in it. So I really like Annie's. That's a great brand, and it's clearly labeled gluten-free on the back. So I always have, especially in the summer, we're getting into barbecue season finally. So I definitely would always have some barbecue sauce on hand, and that's a good one to try. And finally, in this category, I would always recommend having a good olive oil and balsamic. You can very easily make your own salad dressings. I use olive oil on pretty much everything and all cooking. If you're someone that enjoys cooking, I'm sure you know that well. Okay, yeah. So we're hearing that Sweet Baby Ray's is another good brand to check out for a barbecue sauce. And then the other thing that I want to mention is chicken broth, vegetable broth, stuff like that. These you do have to check and make sure you're getting a gluten-free variety. Some of them will have flour. So Pacific is a really good brand. I also buy the low sodium broth and just add my own salt, which I find to be a little bit more healthy for me personally. I always have a couple boxes of broth on hand, whether I'm making a soup or stew or marinating something. It's just nice to not have to run out if I want to just make a quick dinner. So that's a good thing to always stay stocked on. Finally, the really fun one, baking mixes and gluten-free flours. Obviously, this is like one of the most important things that we can have gluten-free, as we do not want to mix that up. There are kind of 1-to-1 baking flours now, and I think we have a session on baking later, but these are great. I've actually, in the beginning of having 1-to-1 flours, I had kind of a mixed experience, but this one is really good and they're getting better. So you really can use this like a normal baking flour, which is great because if you have tried to do any gluten-free baking in the past, you'll see that flours have different weights. So there's a lot of different measuring you have to do and mixing of flours, and so it's really nice to have just like something that you can use normally.
Do you still need to refrigerate them?
I personally don't. I haven't seen anything on here. I know some people do keep their baking powders and mixes and things in the fridge. That might be a good question for our later session if you're going to attend that. I personally keep them in the pantry, so I don't know if that's the problem. Yep.
For larger families, this can be quite expensive. Is there do they sell any of these products at a Costco warehouse type place, or is there an online?
There's a really good market that I found. It's called Thrive Market. It's online, and they have a lot of the products that you'd find in Whole Foods, but they're wholesale. So you do pay a yearly membership fee. I think it's like $50, but then if you buy anything over $50, the shipping is free. They definitely, I have gone on there and looked for products that I buy myself regularly and have noticed they're like $2 and $3 cheaper. So that's a really good one to check out. It's THRIVE. That's a really good resource, and actually it's just come about pretty recently, and it's getting a lot of pickup because they started this company to try to bring healthier foods at a more affordable price to people. So yeah, that's a really good one to check out. Yeah, so one-to-one flours, definitely something I always have on hand. I personally love pizza. I have a Friday night pizza tradition, and I like to make it at home. So I always have a few bags of this in my pantry. It comes out almost like a French bread type pizza. It kind of puffs up a little bit, but it's really awesome. When I get home on Friday night, I don't want to have to realize that I forgot to buy this, so I always have a few bags with me so that I never have to think about it. So that's one thing I highly recommend if you like making pizza at home. And then brown rice flour is something that's really good to have on hand if you're trying to like thicken a sauce or something, or just use like a little bit of it at a time. I just always have just some brown rice flour on hand in my pantry. And then of course, baking and pancake mix from Pamela's is one of my ultimate favorites. This is awesome. The pancakes are really fluffy and delicious, and I just have stayed totally loyal to this company. So that's a really good one. So just a few last things. So as I mentioned, don't be afraid to experiment with different gluten-free things. It will take a while to find your favorites, but I like to tell people if you're new to the diet, try to make a list of things that you use regularly that you know that you're gonna want to replace or that you'll miss, and just kind of focus on one thing at a time until you find the replacement that you really like, and then keep them stocked so that you don't have to run out to the store or realize that you ran out and you can't get the things that you need. It just makes it a little bit of an easier lifestyle. Are there any more questions or?
The nut flours you want in a refrigerator
Yes.
because of the fats, otherwise it drains it.
Mm.
But the regular flours are fine to keep on the pantry shelves.
Thank
Good.
you.
That's a good tip. So like almond flour and things like that should go in the fridge. That's awesome. Good tip.
Hi, I don't know what it's like here. We were in Hawaii, so
Mm.
refrigerated everything there.
Mhm.
But I would go farther than that. Any sort of whole flour where you're retaining the germ,
Mhm.
that there's going to be oil and protein
Mhm.
in the germ, and so those will turn a lot faster than a refined starch.
Then a refined kind of like a white flour like this.
Just
Cool.
a tip for everybody. I love waffles. The Wigman's baking mix that has the pictures of the waffles in the front. That's the only baking mix, the waffle mix I found that will not stick to your waffle iron. I have a non-stick waffle iron that I keep gluten-free. And it's very tasty. So just a tip for y'all.
Cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you all so much. And if anyone wants to try one of these products, feel free to take one home with you. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Awesome.